advisors, BNP senior leaders of different political parties, members of civil society, former ambassadors, members of media, and members of different parts of the civil society, and also we have some organizations that work actively working in Cox's Bazar. Some NGO, their members of those NGOs are present here. So we welcome you all on behalf of Bangladesh Nationalist Party. I welcome you all to this seminar on Rohingya crisis and repatriation strategy, which will be presided over by our Honorable Secretary General, Mirza Fakhrul Islam Alamgir. We are having this seminar marking the 6th year of the Rohingya genocide and the influx. 6 years on, solution to the Rohingya crisis is still elusive. When thousands of Rohingya refugees began flooding onto the beaches and the paddy fields of the southern part of Bangladesh in August of 2017, they brought with them the accounts of unspeakable violence and brutality that had forced them to flee to Bangladesh. This genocide and brutality started with 700,000 victims in the beginning, and now it's 1.2 million and growing every day. BNP in 1970s and 1990s had successfully dealt with the Rohingya repatriation during late President Ziaur Rahman's time and BNP chairperson and former Prime Minister Begum Khaleda Zia's tenure. The weak and flawed repatriation agreement with Myanmar government by the current AL regime has not ensured safe, voluntary, dignified and sustainable return of the Rohingyas to their homeland. BNP holds this seminar today with a position paper in the midst of this very grave crisis that affects the Rohingyas as well as the Bangladeshi population. Today, the keynote paper will be presented by our Honorable Standing Committee member and Chairman of BNP Foreign Committee, Mr. Amir Khosrow Mahmood Chaudhry, and we will have 2-3 discussions on this issue, and I would like to reiterate to our guests that we want to finish today's seminar in 1.5 hours. So I would request our discussants and our speakers who want to speak to make their speeches brief and to the point. Now I would like to call upon Mr. Amir Khosrow Mahmood Chaudhry to present the keynote paper today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shema. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, good afternoon. I'm quite privileged to be able to present the paper at a time the Rohingya crisis reached a point where no clear direction is in sight. The paper based on BNP's observation and thoughts going forward, various reports and agreements, statements addressing the Rohingya crisis. However, we welcome your suggestions and thoughts towards a solution to develop our policy in the future. I'll just keep part of the paper to make it bearable for the participants. Otherwise, it's going to be too long story. So that we also save some time for your comments. The Rohingya population has endured persecution, violence, and discrimination within their home country of Myanmar, compelling them to flee and seek refuge in Bangladesh over past 5 decades. The major displacements occurred in 1978, 1992, 2017. In the period of August to September 2017, during the civilian rule of Aung San Suu Kyi, Myanmar's military conducted a severe crackdown on Rohingya villages and townships in Rakhine, resulting in over 740,000 individuals crossing the Naf River and seeking refuge in Bangladesh. Tragically, an estimated 25,000 Rohingyas lost their lives during this offensive, with thousands of women subjected to rape and brutal torture. This crackdown is presently under investigation by the UN Court for potential genocide. In March 2022, the United States formally determined that the Myanmar military had indeed committed acts of genocide and crimes against humanity against the ethnic Rohingya Muslims. This historic declaration, as Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated, reaffirms the human rights and dignity of Rohingyas, which Burmese military has endeavored to destroy. In November 2017, the current Awami League regime, lacking democratic legitimacy, hastily signed a repatriation agreement with Suu Kyi's government. Experts and military observers who closely scrutinized the agreement deemed it deeply humiliating, as it grants the Myanmar government complete authority to dictate the terms of repatriation of Rohingyas, their own people, to Rakhine. Observers predict that, based on this agreement, which permits the return of 300 individuals per day and 1,500 per week, it will take until at least 2046 to repatriate over 1 million Rohingyas currently residing in camps within Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar district. We firmly believe that the ongoing humanitarian tragedy demands sustainable and meaningful action. The continued lack of progress in repatriating the Rohingya community, despite 6 years having passed since the genocidal clearance operation had started, is deeply concerning and unacceptable. Fact remains, not a single Rohingya refugee could be repatriated till date. Unfortunately, 2 previous attempts at repatriation have failed. Under a new agreement, Myanmar has now agreed to accept the return of 1,176 Rohingyas to what the Myanmar junta claims are model villages in Mangdu township as part of a pilot repatriation project. Independent experts and human rights groups monitoring this latest repatriation attempt have described these model villages as internally displaced persons camps, IDP. Since the outbreak of anti-Muslim riots, internally displaced persons camps in 2012, more than 130,000 Rohingyas have already been confined to IDP camps in Rakhine currently. Basically, these are the camps for internally displaced people, not for rehabilitation of Rohingyas from Bangladesh. We perceive this new repatriation attempt as a trap. I repeat, a trap. which will only perpetuate persecution faced by one of the world's forgotten minorities. On December 21, 2022, the United Nations Security Council passed a historic resolution regarding the situation in Myanmar, a development we welcome. However, while the resolution acknowledges the basic needs of the people of Myanmar, we are disappointed to note the absence of provisions for justice and accountability for the gravest international crimes committed against the Rohingya people, including genocide. We urge the UN Security Council to take action and ensure that the Rohingya community can return to their homeland in Rakhine State in a dignified and protected manner, with full recognition of their ethnic and citizenship rights. Additionally, we call for full compliance with the provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. Throughout its history, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party BNP has dealt with Rohingya crisis twice. During its tenure in the late 1970s and in 1990s. On both the occasions, our parties succeeded to create remarkable diplomatic pressure upon the Myanmar military regimes to repatriate the Rohingyas. Thanks to the unprecedented pressure exerted by our party's founder, President Ziaur Rahman, on the regime of General Ne Win in 1978, Myanmar was compelled to take back almost all 200,000 Rohingyas who were forced to flee to Bangladesh. Begum Khaleda Zia, the chairperson of our party, had applied similar pressure on Myanmar when over 250,000 Rohingyas sought refuge in Bangladesh after a major crackdown in 1992. Myanmar agreed to take back at least 236,000 Rohingyas, with only a fraction remaining in two refugee camps in Kutapalang and Noyapara. As Bangladesh stands on the threshold of a historic transition, we believe that a fresh approach to Rohingya crisis is necessary in order to find a sustainable and dignified solution to one of the world's longest running humanitarian and political crises. Our objective is to ensure the voluntary and safe return of every single Rohingya individual to their homeland with dignity and equal rights. Unfortunately, the current Awami League regime, lacking popular legitimacy, is hindering the possibility of achieving a just resolution to the crisis. They have miserably failed to perceive the magnitude of the crisis. Their inability to take multilateral and all-out effort to resolve the problem and to send even a single Rohingya back to their homeland is the government's utter diplomatic failure. Instead of multilateral global approach, this is not understood. Why? Government is stubbornly taking a bilateral route. Various UN agencies and human rights organizations opine that an environment for safe and dignified repatriation has not been created in Myanmar as yet. Rohingya organizations are also opposing the proposed involuntary repatriation without recognition of their Myanmar citizenship. The United Nations Human Rights Council claimed that the Bangladesh authorities are using deceptive and coercive measures to compel Rohingya refugees to return to Myanmar against their will. This statement of the UN rapporteur is undoubtedly a matter of concern for Bangladesh. It may be recalled the ruling Bangladesh government had earlier sidestepped the international community, including the UN, and signed a bilateral agreement with Myanmar for Rohingya repatriation that produced no result. At a time when the global community, including the UN, are opposed to any involuntary and unsustainable repatriation under the current political and security conditions in Rakhine, taking up by the Bangladesh government of an unrealistic pilot or so-called trial repatriation project, again under a trilateral initiative, will no doubt be a futile experiment and simply to serve to ease the pressure built upon Myanmar, centering the Burma Act, the ICC actions, and sanctions by the democratic countries like USA and the EU. I'm skipping here a little bit. When a government lacks popular democratic mandate, it resorts to outsourcing. When a government lacks popular democratic mandate, it resorts to outsourcing its foreign policy to external powers, to whom repatriation of Rohingya refugees is not the priority. For resolving the Rohingya crisis will be our top national and foreign policy priority, focusing on finding a permanent solution to this complex crisis. Issue is, if we don't recognize the problem well enough, we cannot confront the issues, and issues don't get solved. Bearing in this mind, we have some priorities we have outlined to discuss the ongoing crisis more effectively. So I'll go one by one. Increasing the engagement with the UN and international community to discuss the crisis. UN should supervise voluntarily safe, dignified, sustainable repatriation. Recognize the crimes against the Rohingya as genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes as termed by UN Independent Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar. Support credible accountability efforts to ensure justice for the victims and prevent the recurrence of violence. All perpetrators must be brought to justice through the International Criminal Court and other international tribunals. Recognize that the persecution of Rohingya is a regional and global problem, requiring a proactive policy from ASEAN countries. It is crucial for all countries in the region to take responsibility and prevent the seas from becoming a graveyard for those seeking safety. Enhanced regional cooperation among ASEAN members is essential to improve the protection of Rohingya both in Myanmar and refugee camps abroad and at transit. Welcome the Burma Act recently enacted by the United States, which supports democracy in Myanmar. The EU, as a founding and active member of the ASEAN Regional Forum ARF, may foster constructive dialogue and consultation to ensure peace, prosperity and stability in the Asia-Pacific region, leveraging long-standing economic, trade and political interactions between the EU and the ASEAN. call for increased pressure on Myanmar from the United Nations, ASEAN, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC. While the OIC may have limited leverage over Myanmar, it can rally global support for Rohingya cause. Call for increased humanitarian aid from UN agencies to support the Rohingya. Despite global attention being diverted to other crises, it is vital not to forget the plight of over 1 million Rohingya living in various camps in Bangladesh. BNP believes, while pursuing voluntary repatriation on priority basis, keeping all our stakeholders on board, the upbringing of Rohingya children has to be taken care of, keeping in mind children's health and continuity of Myanmar curriculum of education. Initiate efforts to build civilian Rohingya leadership in the camps. The aim is to introduce fresh, educated, and future-oriented civilian leadership in the camps to counter rising criminal activities. Recognize the increasingly important role of Rohingya diaspora in finding a solution to their long-standing humanitarian and political crisis. Establish stronger ties with internationally recognized Rohingya diaspora leaders, granting them more space and collaborating closely with them in international fora. Address the issue of employment opportunities for Rohingya adults. Recognize that relying solely on continuous global donation to support Rohingya refugees is unsustainable. Assess employment opportunities in the Greater Chittagong region, and if labor shortages, I say if labor shortages are identified in major sectors such as farming and manufacturing, allow Rohingyas to work in these productive sectors. Now we say this with a caveat, because it must happen. We have to be sure that such an employment does not crowd out local employment. So this is a very sensitive issue for locals, as you understand. So any such programs must bear in mind, so it doesn't crowd out the local employment, and it does not drive down the prevailing wages also, because this is a concern for locals living around Rohingya camps. Establish an information monitoring system in collaboration with UNHCR to track the Rohingya refugees, their employment locations, and other whereabouts. I'll skip some more here. Review Bhasanchor camp. So this is something needs to be reviewed actually. Ensure that the views and aspirations of Rohingya refugees themselves are taken into account when devising repatriation plans. Engage more closely with the Rohingya community to understand their desires and comply fully with UN treaties and protocols on the repatriation of refugees. Facilitate Track 2 meetings. Facilitate Track 2 meetings between Rohingya and other Rakhine communities, aiming at fostering dialogue and reconciliation. Achieving cohesion and peaceful existence between Rohingya and Rakhine communities is crucial for finding a sustainable solution to the Rohingya crisis. Rohingya refugee problem, with 1.2 million now sheltered in Bangladesh, with an annual increase of 30,000 due to new childbirth, is a mounting problem on our economy and almost a threat to our national security. We must resolve the crisis the soonest possible by ensuring the Rohingyas safe, voluntary, dignified, sustainable repatriation back to their motherland with their Myanmar citizenship. To achieve this, we must take all our international friends, including our neighbors, on board, create an effective environment and pressure on Myanmar. The incumbent regime, without people's mandate, focusing more on protecting its illegitimate power, itself marred with awful record of human rights violation, is not getting legitimacy to deal with the Rohingya human rights issue in the international forum. For its own survival, the fascist regime is compromising with the greater national interest to Bangladesh. Therefore, a legitimate government with people's mandate accountable to the people is a must to engage all the international stakeholders for ensuring a permanent solution of the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amikus Mahmood Chaudhry, for the keynote paper. Now we would move on to our discussants. We have 3 discussants today. I would request all of them to keep it to the point, because we would like to finish it on time, finish the seminar on time. And then we will take some few comments from our audience if anybody wants to add anything to the discussion. Our first discussant is Dr. Zaidur Rahman, faculty member of Independent University, a popular columnist and a political activist. Dr. Zaidur Rahman.
Thank you, Shamapa. Good afternoon, all the distinguished listeners here. It's been a privilege for me to be a discussant in this program, and having this very high quality audience, I frankly would like to say that I'm a bit nervous, but still I've got some points to clear here. I was going through the paper that has been presented here. It's a very comprehensive paper, and I'd like to have my hypothesis on a specific sentence. I read it out and I'll try to add some points to that. The sentence is, when a government lacks popular democratic mandate, it resorts to outsourcing its foreign policy to external powers to whom repatriation of Rohingya refugees is not the priority. In fact, the main problem lies here, I believe. And I'd like to add some more points to one other part. In November 2017, current Awami League regime lacking democratic legitimacy hastily signed the repatriation agreement, and it said that this agreement lacked in key components which would preserve our interests. But there's another problem in that it was not an agreement even. It was an arrangement. The language was arrangement, not an agreement, not a memorandum of understanding. It was an arrangement. And it said that we are trying to solve the problem bilaterally. This arrangement reduced pressure on Rohingya or on Myanmar government very seriously, because they then tried to present to the global community that we are trying to solve the problem in bilateral terms. And China mediated. We can clearly remember at that time Chinese foreign minister came to Bangladesh, he went to Yangon, and finally, and he explicitly told that China wants this should be solved bilaterally. Even finally we tried to have UNHCR as a part of that, but Myanmar didn't agree. So everything happened what Myanmar wanted. Not only that, a key word here is internally displaced people. Myanmar don't like that we say those people Rohingya. They like internally displaced people, and we started using that word as well. So what Myanmar tries to impose on us, we did it. Why? I'll come to that point a bit later. even what happened in Myanmar, it was a clear genocide. I'd like to refer an expert. His name is Gregory Stanton, the chairman of Genocide Watch. He clearly mentioned that the genocide started in Myanmar for this term in 2012. For the 5 years it happened till 2017. Later on, the people came here to our country. So we didn't use the word genocide even. So, in fact, just some seconds. Sorry. So we didn't use the word genocide, and we always tried to fulfill the demand of the Myanmar and by the mediation of China. In recent times, there's an information here that is we were trying to have some pilot of repatriation of 1,176 people to Mongdu Township. They went there and found that it's not their place. It's a different camp where they are trying to be repatriated, and without any form of citizenship. Without citizenship, the crisis will never happen, never come to an end. The problem, in fact, for Myanmar is ICC will have some hearing. It was scheduled on April this year, then it was deferred, and finally deferred again. So they tried to show that we are trying to do something bilaterally so that they can have some privilege in the ICC hearing. If we believe in Myanmar's commitments, most of us even don't know that Myanmar don't recognize that around 1 million Rohingyas are in this country. They think it's well below 100,000. It's hardly 70 or 80,000. So when we try to negotiate with Myanmar, we forget that they even don't recognize the problem, the extent of the problem. They recognize only 10% the number we are having here. I'd like to add one more information. Not only 1.2 million, every year 30 to 35,000 children are born in these camps. So the number is now could be around 1.3 or 1.4 million even. Every year 35,000 at least children are adding to their population. So this is the crisis nowadays. And to be frank, in our country we don't discuss it very explicitly that it's a very geopolitical and geostrategic issue nowadays. I'd like to again refer to another specialist. His name is Graham Allison, who uttered a term Thucydides trap, and he believes that there's a clash may happen between China and USA. Rohingya crisis, I believe, is related to that because those who are a bit informed know that there's a strategic choke point called Malacca Strait, and in any case of blockade, China is trying to have some alternative ways. Such kind of alternative one is Gwadar port of Pakistan, at the same time Kiakfiu deep sea port in Myanmar, from where they have some deep sea port, at the same time some oil and gas pipeline to China. So having some Rakhine province free of any sort of conflict is a necessity for them. At the same time, if we add another information, that is the Burma Act that the US recently enacted, I'd like to say a few words about Burma Act because US can impose sanction on any people by their existing laws. I know in our country some RAB officials and RAB was sanctioned by that law. The necessity of having a different law to impose sanctions on that. I read that law and found that some articles 301, 302, 303 and 401, 402 and 403 gave the president explicit very strong power to impose sanctions, taking steps for the people who are trying to restore democracy in that country. Now another question arises. In a country when we are trying to discuss some repatriation issue with a government which controls less than half of the land of that country, almost full-blown civil war is going on in that country, and another government which is being patronized by the West called National Unity Government or NUG, led by Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy and other political parties. And interesting information is NUG recognizes Rohingya as a valid ethnic minority of Myanmar. So now the question arises, whom should we try to discuss to? Is it the military junta having the power or NUG government? In fact, in our public places, we usually don't discuss these issues. I'd like to go to that point where I started this. When the government is not elected from 2014, since 2014 we are not having an elected government in this country, so it's trying to restore its power at any cost by giving some benefit to other countries which are against our interests. We know everything. It's not the stupidity or mismanagement of the government, I believe. The government did it in a very informed way. They had in my consideration, they had a deal to restore their power, to be in the power, and they tried to take the deal of other countries. The government says that they are great powers are their friends, China, Russia, and India. And most of us know in the last proposal that came to the United Nations only to criticize Myanmar's activities, not imposing some sanctions. This type of proposal was not passed due to the veto of China and Russia repeatedly. In June 2023, they last vetoed that proposal. At the same time, in most of the cases, India abstains from the voting. That means they are also not in favor of us. So the government is claiming these three countries are very great friends of the government, but we are not finding any of them are in favor of our country, I better say. They may be in favor of the government to keep the government in the power, but they are not serving the purpose of the people of this country. I won't make it a bit long because the time is a bit constrained, it's already mentioned. I'll read out some last two sentences. Here lies the main factor, I believe. For its own survival, the fascist regime is compromising with the greater national interest of Bangladesh. Therefore, a legitimate government with people's mandate accountable to the people is must to engage all the international stakeholders for ensuring a permanent solution of the crisis. I strongly believe in that. The problem, in fact, we are nowadays facing in our country, in all the cases, when the government is trying to have some bilateral discussion with any of the governments of the country, of the world, they always try to focus on their own survival. I can give lots of examples by which I can prove those were not in favor of our country's interest, not in favor of the interest of this country's people, but they did it because they want to extend their power more and more. So that is the deal, and here lies the main problem. So unless we have an elected participatory election and an elected government, these problems won't be solved. Finally, I won't say that having a good elected government will be able to solve all the problems, because I've already mentioned that Rohingya crisis is not a mere bilateral problem, it's a geostrategic issue nowadays. But still, an elected government will have much more power to deal everything in favor of the people of this country. And I'd like to thank you all for an active listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zayed. We'll move on to our next discussant. Our next discussant is Professor Shahidul Zaman, International Relations Professor of Dhaka University. I would request him to give his speech.
Thank you, ma'am. I know that there is a time constraint. Respected Chairman, sir, and respected members in the panel sitting on the high table. I'll get into some clear-cut conversation with you. Perhaps that may arouse your interest. Now, about 4 decades ago, in 80-81, a few of us, including me, used to brief President Ziaur Rahman on foreign policy issues, especially because he was involved in the Iran-Iraq mediation effort. Now, on that occasion, one evening, at that time, if you remember, one of you, President Carter was in charge in the US, and his national security advisor was Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski used to teach at Georgetown, and he was of Polish origin, and he was extremely hawkish. Now, Brzezinski came up with the doctrine known among many others as the concept of shatter belts. shatter belts mean that a part of some territory within the third world that would tend to fall apart, and if the United States should take interest in penetrating or getting involved there. Now, in his list of shatter belts, Arakan, or the place where the Rohingyas lived and were kicked out, was number one. When President Zia was introduced to the Rohingya crisis, I remember we mentioned Brzezinski's doctrine of shatter belts and the American interest if there would be some administration which has aggressive or imperial designs, that they would get involved in Arakan or have something to do with it. Now this brings me to the current Indo-Pacific strategy, where the United States basically is more focused on the Pacific but has now turned towards the Indian Ocean and has shown consistent interest in not only just the Indian Ocean, in the Bay of Bengal. Why is it so? Some of us tend to believe that just like the way we thought in the Cold War that the US would only have a passing interest in the Bay of Bengal. But that's not true. There are several reasons why the United States would like to have a lasting impact on the Bay of Bengal, and as I believe, why Bangladesh should promote and sustain this American interests for its own sake, for its own future geopolitical salvation, and also the fact that we may perhaps have a government in the future, a BNP government led by a new Prime Minister named Tariq Rahman, who has the blood of President Zia, and he might probably think of a more positive approach in terms of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Now, the very fact that the United States needs to stop any Chinese outlet into the Indian Ocean, as my preceding speaker had said, and the very fact that if China gets an opportunity to set up base in the Bay of Bengal and develop a relationship with the Myanmar Navy to the extent that it uses this as a second access to the Straits of Malacca, this would be a great headache for the United States. As you know, within the next 5 years, China plans to annex Taiwan, and the United States is absolutely determined not to let China use its military power to annex Taiwan. Taiwan is absolutely vital for the West, mainly because of the rare advanced computer chips on which Taiwan almost has monopoly, and secondly because across the Straits of Malacca 80% of container shipping passes along. Now if China goes on claiming this strait as its territorial sea and actually intervenes militarily in Taiwan, this would perhaps lead to almost a certain American intervention. The other reason why I think that the United States would like to have a presence or a sustained involvement in the Bay of Bengal is the very fact that the National Unity Government, which my preceding speaker had mentioned, has appealed to the US Congress over the last 2 years to come to its rescue. As mentioned, there is a genocide going on by the Tatmadaw, and unfortunately this present Bangladesh government has put all its eggs in one basket. It believes that the Tatmadaw would take back the refugees. This government believes that there can be no other alternate approach in terms of looking at other sources of power in Myanmar, like the National Unity Government, and as far as Arakan is concerned, the Arakan Army, which is very powerful in Arakan. It's very unfortunate that we have done nothing so far to have any links with the National Unity Government. But the United States Congress, had approved the Burma Act. The Burma Act in many ways is shrouded with mystery. It's as if, we hear about it, but but we really don't know what it is all about. Now, the Burma Act was actually signed in 1948, perhaps 49, when the United States saw that the Burmese president was slaughtered, President Aung San, and the military junta which came to power in Myanmar, in Burma at that time, had to carry out a plebiscite 10 years later, which would allow the states in Burma to decide whether to stay with the Union or to secede. Now, many of you perhaps know that in 1947, when the Rohingya people wanted to join the former Pakistan, Jinnah had refused. There are documents which indicate that Sher-e-Bangla had insisted upon Jinnah to give a hearing to the Rohingya delegation. But Jinnah said, it's too late, my hands are tied, I can't do it. And General Aung San had gone to Jinnah and assured him that the Rohingyas would enjoy full citizenship in Burma, and that even certain Rohingyas were participating in the formulation of the Burma constitution. Now, unfortunately, when General Aung San was murdered, the military junta that came to power for 60 years, it has kept Myanmar, united by the use of force. It has dehumanized Myanmar, and right now the Burmese people have appealed to the US Congress to intervene, to save them from genocide, and they are fighting a civil war, and in many areas the Shans, Karen, Kachins have set up independent areas. Now, what are we doing? We have done nothing to link up with the National Unity Government, but on the other hand, the National Unity Government has recognized the Rohingyas as part of the Myanmar diaspora, as part of the Myanmar Union, has even sought forgiveness to the Rohingya people for what they have done under Aung San Suu Kyi government, that they were kept apart. And the Rohingyas diaspora outside have responded to this the proposal by the National Unity Government to come aboard, to climb the ship of resistance to the Myanmar military. So we are in a situation where the United States has to play a key role. The American Congress has decided to pass the Burma Act once more in last November, and it has done it in a bipartisan manner where the Republicans and the Democrats united. It's rare that they would intervene. In what way, it's not certain, but they would intervene to remove the Tatmadaw and set up the Suu Kyi government or a democratic system in Myanmar. One reason I think the Americans realize, and for Bangladesh it's crucial, that secretly this military government in Myanmar had been carrying out research on developing nuclear weapons capability. It has had the cooperation of North Korea. It has got the wink from China, meaning that China wouldn't mind. And you can imagine what would happen in 3 or 4 years' time if this Tatmadaw develops nuclear weapon. They have changed their maps. They have tried to show St. Martin as a part of Myanmar, and I won't be surprised if they put their hands on Bandarbon as well as the St. Martin's Island, so that they can have this entire sea, Bay of Bengal, to draw the resources that we now have as our own. So this is a very dangerous situation, and this particular government in Bangladesh, unelected, an almost pariah regime in power, it really goes on appealing to the Tatmadaw and to the China. Now, you can't expect China to help you in any way on the question of Rohingyas. China has been building military installations across that entire Arakan region where the Rohingyas used to live. And China sometimes gives a display of, cosmetic exercise, that as if it would take back some of the Rohingyas. This would never happen. The only way that that the Rohingyas can go back, and I hope that the future government in Bangladesh should recognize this, is if the United States, according to the Burma Act, implements a policy whereby it would militarily help all the NUGs, fighting members who are fighting a civil war, and really respond to the appeal to the US Congress. I believe that there is a lot of sense. Americans don't talk much about it to the Bangladeshis because this present government is totally hostile and immune to the idea of ever supporting any American effort to militarily help the National Unity Government or the groups that are fighting for their removal to crush the Tatmadaw. One thing is certain, that the Americans do not want to see the Tatmadaw survive. On the other hand, it's China, it's Russia, it's even India, which would go on doing business as usual with the Tatmadaw. You remember when the Chinese gave us a submarine, a very old submarine, the Indians promptly responded by gifting a submarine to the Tatmadaw. When we had the problem of demarcating the maritime boundaries, the Americans helped us with all the documents. Britain helped us. We got a lot of documentation which really was wonderful. There was a time when Myanmar tried to penetrate into our maritime boundaries, and the United States Navy offered Bangladesh a helping hand. Some of their ships came all the way from Diego Garcia and decided to, to really guard our maritime boundaries. Now, what I'm trying to suggest to you is that we need a cooperation with the United States. The Americans have an Indo-Pacific strategy where it is in their interest to be present in the Bay of Bengal. It's not St. Martin. St. Martin is not an island which can be used as a base. It has no such feasibility, and the waters around the Bay of Bengal are very shallow. For almost over 100 kilometers, no huge American ship can move to the Bay of Bengal to the Bangladesh coast. The only place where near the Bangladesh coast, there can be a feasible American presence is the Swatch of No Ground. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. The Swatch of No Ground is located 50 kilometers, around 30 kilometers from the Dublar Chor, in Sundarban. Just 30 kilometers south of Dublar Chor, you have a Swatch of No Ground, which is the second deepest point in the world after the Mariana Depth in Philippines. The Swatch of No Ground is about 1800 kilometers in length and 20 kilometers wide. And this is a region which was not known. And if American aircraft carriers wish to fly into the Bay of Bengal, they can come as far, within 50 kilometers of Bangladeshi coastline in the Swatch of No Ground. And they could fly their aircraft all the way into Myanmar in depth and bomb the bloody Tatmadaw into submission and elimination. The United States has to act, and unless Bangladesh decides to get away from this so-called crazy policy, friendship to all and malice to none, which is unrealistic. It sounds good, but this is a utopian policy. We have to decide on our alliance. Look at the entire Pacific Rim. All these countries are American allies, and they need the United States to prevent, right from South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, and Taiwan. All of them require the American military, naval support in order to contain Chinese expansion. Now, the same manner we see the crescent in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, where the Americans, have deep naval alliances. A future government in Bangladesh must develop a naval alliance with the United States in order to protect our maritime zone, because the world is a dirty place. You can't simply exist by extending hands of friendship. Below the surface, it's all a tug of war for territorial gains and greater supremacy. As a student of international security and having been trained in American universities and having spent time in the US Naval Postgraduate School at the Department of National Security, I am convinced that Bangladesh in future would require a very strong alliance with the United States, Britain, and decide on the fate of the Myanmar people, and at the same time ensure a safe return of the Rohingyas to their homeland, and also perceive that this entire Arakan coastline will have some influence, some presence of the Bangladesh military in order to ensure the security of that region. Thank you very much.
I wish we could have listened to you more, Shahiduzaman Bhai, but we don't have enough time. Now I would like to request Ambassador Iftikharul Karim, a seasoned diplomat who has been in his profession in Beijing, Korea, Geneva, and many other places. I would like to request him to share his comments with us. মাইক্রোফোনটা নিয়ে ওখানে
Thank you very much.
ওটা অন করে দেন আইডিয়া
On Korat.
Hello?
I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come in with some comments on this very important issue that has been plaguing our country for a long, long time. First of all, I congratulate Mr. Amir Khusru Mahmood Chaudhry for the paper that he has presented. It's very comprehensive and it's extremely well thought out paper with regard to the strategy that should be adopted for resolving the Rohingya crisis and repatriation strategy in the future. Clearly, we have failed as a country to address this issue for the last 5 years. But the Rohingya crisis has not been a single event now. It had happened twice before, and on both those occasions, it was resolved bilaterally by the forceful intervention of the government at that point in time, which was President Zia's government in 1978 and later on in 1992. In each of those interventions with the Myanmar governments, it was done bilaterally. But this time around, the bulk of the population that has sought refuge with us are women and children. And it is in Myanmar, while it was persecution earlier, I think other than genocide, it was also ethnic cleansing that was attempted and done in Myanmar by the government of Myanmar. This requires a much more positive strategy of engaging countries in the region also. For example, here Mr. Chaudhry has very correctly identified the role of ASEAN countries over Myanmar. Similarly, I think we should engage with our neighbors, which is India and China, who would have a far greater influence in bringing around the repatriation of the Rohingyas in a more sustainable manner over the time. The UN has been negligent, at least I think, in providing assistance to Bangladesh for what is a huge economic burden for the welfare of the refugees that we have. 1 million refugees, of whom 70% are women and children. And this leads us to believe that they have very little possibility of returning to their home country in a dignified manner and be resettled unless there is sufficient pressure that is applied by Bangladesh itself, but also with the assistance of the UN, the neighboring countries. India has a very, very critical role to play there, and I don't know whether India is doing that. And it has no reason why, we have no reason why we cannot pressure India into helping us with this issue in Rohingya repatriation. I will not go into the strategic issues that my immediate predecessors talked about of the Indo-Pacific strategy and so on and so forth, but we need to focus basically in engaging China, People's Republic of China, Myanmar, the Republic of India, and the ASEAN countries who neighbor Myanmar, and they have a lot of influence over Myanmar regime ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Iftikhar Karim, for your valuable comments. I remember you. Our discussants have already spoken. Now I would like to, we are at the tail end of our seminar, so I would like to open up the forum. A few of our guests want to make some brief comments. So I would like to request Major General Syed Muhammad Ibrahim Big Protek, Chairman of Kollan Party, to just have few comments on the subject. Thank you. Mic to then, please. Okay. 1 minute.
I've been given 1 minute's time. Good afternoon or good evening, whichever suits best. In the year 1992, Mr. President, I will take little more than a minute, and I seek your permission in advance.
Oh, yeah, please.
And Shamawad insisted that I speak only in English, and I said I know that better than other languages. Thank you. So now, in the year 1992, when the Rohingya crisis had occurred for the second time in the history of Bangladesh, the then government took recourse to two methods. One of them was the diplomatic, and the other was military. Incidentally, I was a brigadier then, posted in the Army's headquarters and dealing with military operations. And we had deployed a brigade to counter the Burmese threat. Now that I am a political worker, Chairman Bangladesh Kollan Party, my wisdom as a general may be of less use, and my intuitions about a political worker may be of better use. What I suggest, we may not get into a confrontation, but I would draw keen attention to one sentence which already referred to by Professor Dr. Zahid. I draw your attention to second page, third page. Unfortunately, sorry, যেটা বলছিলেন আপনি এই যে এদিকে ওই যে when a government lacks a popular democratic mandate, it resorts to outsourcing its foreign policy to external powers to whom repatriation of Rohingya refugees is not the priority. We are trying to solve dengue problem in Bangladesh. We are equipping our hospitals. In addition, we are also trying to subdue the mosquito community. Similarly, if we cannot find out the root causes of the crisis, we may not succeed in our attempts to solve it. The crisis lies in geopolitical reasons, attempts by some of our friends or so-called friends in diplomatic language to use the territory of Arakan to their advantage, depriving Bangladesh and endangering the security of Bangladesh. I therefore urge upon all to give a very comprehensive thought to solving this problem and insist that the world community be involved in it. Involving the world community in this effort may not suit some of the friends of Bangladesh. Kindly see who have donated to this crisis, and you will discover who are friends and who are not friends. I would like to beg leave of you, thanking you that I was given the time. Allah Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, sir. I would like to conclude go on to our standing committee members. If there is anybody else who wants to make a brief comment, the floor is open. You want to? Okay. Oh, did somebody raise a hand?
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Distinguished guests and all other invited guests. First, I want to This is Rul Haq Noor, ex-Vice President of Dhaka University, Central Student Union Daksu, and President of newly formed political party Gono Adhikar Parishad. So I would like to draw attention 2 or 3 points in a brief, as time is short. The displacement occurred in also 1978, 1992, and 2017. But at the time of 1978 and 92, at the time it was done peacefully, because at that time a strong government was there. But now why it is not possible? First, because there is also an issue in this paper. This is a authoritarian government, an elected government, who are involved in gross human rights violation. Even US sanctioned our death squad RAB for extrajudicial killing. Why RAB was involved in this type of activities? To save this government, to keep in power in this government. So through this government, there is not possible a strong initiatives, because this government are in power by some, you can say, syndicates, different kinds of syndicates, business syndicates, government official syndicates, judiciary syndicates, different types of syndicates. So they are not able to take a strong position, which was taken at the time of 1978 and 1992. So that's why, first I think, if we want to solve this problem, we need a fresh democratic government. Without a democratic government, it is not possible. We can pay loads of things, we can present loads of paper. Because one of the panel speaker, Mr. Jayed, said this is also a geopolitical strategy and geopolitics. Here is our closest neighboring country. I do not want to mention the name, but I want to say our closest neighboring country. They are not saying anything about these issues, even when a resolution is in the UN, but they are not taking position with us. Even ASEAN is not also taking a strong position. Even some ASEAN countries, there is huge investment in Myanmar, like Singapore, even in our neighboring country, India, China. So first, if we want to solve this problem, I think election is coming ahead. All the opposition parties are struggling for 14 years for a fair election, fresh election. So here is our diplomatic friends. So I would request you to take position on the line of Bangladeshi people, democratic movement. If we can achieve a free, fair election, if we own our democratic movement, then we will be possible to find a friendly solution, a good solution. Thanks all.
Thank you, Noor. So, okay, you speak. Mic to open. Okay. Our Bangladesh Nationalist Party advisor panel, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and convener of Dhaka South BNP. Veteran freedom fighter, Mr. Abdul Salam.
Mr. President and all participants, I draw the attention of all political parties of Bangladesh, because all the peoples of Bangladesh is not clear about Rohingya's problem. So it's our duty, first of all of the Bangladeshi people to unite regarding this problem and common issue. So this is our duty. I think not only Nationalist Party, all parties and all citizens of Bangladesh have to know what is the problem, Rohingya's problem, which will be future, not in now only. So it's our duty to organize united all Bangladeshi peoples regarding this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Salam Bhai. We have our standing committee members, Dr. Abdul Moin Khan, Mr. Gausha Chandra Roy, and Mr. Nuzul Islam Khan. So I would like to request our standing committee member, Mr. Abdul Moin Khan, to say a few words on this subject. Thank you.
The position paper of BNP has already been presented here, so I don't think we have much to add, except just a few minor points. Number one, I must remind everyone present in this room that when initially the latest Rohingya crisis started 6 years ago, our government said that they will not accept any Rohingya. I need to remind this because people may have forgotten this. Strangely, our government, which obviously does not represent the people, they declined to accept the rights of the people. Accepting Rohingyas who were brutally killed and others who fled from Myanmar and tried to take refuge in Bangladesh at that point in time, that was a humanitarian problem. And our government refused to accept that humanitarian problem. So that is point number one. So after a while, when the government recognized that they made a gross mistake, they changed their position, and then they were ready and they accepted the Rohingyas, and the influx was so intense that within a couple of months, more than 1 million refugees, they left Burma, Myanmar, because the intimidation and torture was also intense within Myanmar, and they fled into Bangladesh because that was the only exit available to them. So the government was forced to accept them. And then the government took the position that I think, if I remember correct, they said if we can eat lentil and rice, we can also feed the refugees lentil and rice. That was the position. So that was 180% overturn of the government. Good. And then what happened? After a while, when this process continued and efforts were made internationally to make arrangements for these refugees to go back to their motherland, our government seemed callous and they didn't really take any position. On the contrary, they decided to rehabilitate them on a small island, hardly 30,000, not more than that, out of 1 million. So the big question came in, why did the government decide to rehabilitate the refugees from Burma, the Rohingyas? Because that gave the wrong signal, I believe, not only to the Rohingyas, but also to Myanmar, that the government of Bangladesh is now not keen on repatriating these Rohingyas back to their motherland, to their own home, rather rehabilitate them within Bangladesh for whatever reasons, God knows. So now we are here what we ought to have been here. The government's mishandling of this issue completely messed up the whole thing. I admit that the solution to the issue is not within the hands of Bangladesh itself. It became a regional issue, now it has become a global issue. I appreciate that, but the question is, the Rohingyas are the victims of the torture inside Myanmar. The Bangladesh government has also been forced to carry on this burden of 1.2 million Rohingyas within small areas in Chittagong, Hill Drugs and Chittagong. And the consequence is now nobody knows what's going to happen to this 1.2 million Rohingyas. Whether they can at all return to their own homeland, because our government utterly failed in negotiating a solution, whether bilaterally or multilaterally. I think that's where we stand today. That is the fact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul Moin Khan. Now we're going to conclude our seminar, and I would like to request our Honorable Secretary General to give his important speech, deliver his important speech on this seminar, on this issue, and also conclude the seminar. And I would like to thank all the diplomats, members of civil society, NGO members, political leaders, and our BNP senior leaders to be present here, and the media to be present here in this seminar, because BNP believes that Rohingya issue has been a very pertinent issue, and it's yet to be solved, and we take it very seriously, and hopefully in the future Bangladesh Nationalist Party will take a lead as it did in the past in solving the issue. Now I would like to request our Secretary General to deliver his speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I must thank you all for making some time to attend this seminar. I have been requested by my fellow journalist friends that I should make my comments in Bengali, and I will be doing that because all of our speakers have spoken in English, and we have already presented our paper to the international community as well as to the audience here. You must be knowing that that we have organized this seminar only because of one reason, that what Mr. Salam has said, that the people of Bangladesh now are forgetting that Rohingya is a problem in our country, and that is because of the government's attitude and their role in the whole issue. In fact, government is trying to make the people forget these issues which they have failed.
They have utterly failed to solve this issue of Rohingyas, who are more than 1 million almost, and creating serious problem for our security, for our regional security, as well as for the people residing there. And this has become a problem for the international community as a whole. The Rakhine people, that means the Rohingyas, have every right to go back to their homeland. And they have every right to go back there with all dignity and with the honor and their citizenship. But this government has failed to take any initiative and try to create an international opinion to keep pressure on this Myanmar government. আমি ইতিমধ্যেই ধন্যবাদ জানাবো আমাদের বিদেশি কূটনীতিক যারা আজকে এখানে এসেছেন এবং যারা আমাদের বিভিন্ন রাজনৈতিক দলের নেতৃবৃন্দ যারা এসেছেন তাদেরকে, যে তারা আজকে একটা অত্যন্ত জরুরি বিষয়, যদিও এই মুহূর্তে যখন বাংলাদেশের মানুষ তাদের ন্যূনতম ভোটের অধিকারের জন্য লড়াই করছে, যখন বাংলাদেশের মানুষ তার গণতন্ত্রকে ফিরে আনার জন্য লড়াই করছে, এবং সে লড়াইতে হচ্ছে এই সরকারের বিরুদ্ধে, যে সরকারের কোনো ম্যান্ডেট নেই, যাদের মানুষের ভোট নিয়ে তারা ক্ষমতায় আসেনি, জোর করে ক্ষমতায় টিকে আছে, আজকে তাদের বিরুদ্ধে আজকে মানুষ লড়াইটা করছে তার অধিকারের জন্য, এবং সেটা ছিল মিনিমাম ডেমোক্রেটিক রাইটস। আজকে আসতে দেরি হয়েছে, আই এম সরি বিকজ আই ওয়াজ এ বিট লেট টু অ্যারাইভ হিয়ার, বিকজ আই ওয়াজ ইন দ্য কোর্ট facing trials on charges of arsoning a garbage truck of the municipality. That's the fate of all our leaders in BNP, and almost, you know that I always tell that 4 million people are facing these sort of charges. And most of them go, right, exactly. So, আপনারা বুঝতেই পারছেন যে এরকম একটা প্রতিকূল পরিবেশে, যেখানে আদালত বলতে কিছু নেই, যেখানে প্রশাসন বলতে কিছু নেই, আছে শুধুমাত্র তাদের জন্য, যেখানে আজকে কিছুক্ষণ আগে আমাকে একজন সাংবাদিক খবর দিয়ে গেলেন যে গতকাল ডক্টর ইউনূসের যে স্টেটমেন্ট দিয়েছেন পক্ষে প্রায় আপনার 50 জন না 160 জন আপনার আন্তর্জাতিক বিশ্ব নেতা, তাদের এই স্টেটমেন্টের বিপক্ষে 50 জন সম্পাদক আপনার একটা স্টেটমেন্ট দিয়েছেন। আমাকে সাংবাদিক বলে গেলেন যে এটা ফেক, কারণ কেউই এটা সই করেন নাই, তাদের বেশি মোস্ট অফ দেম। তার মধ্যে এখন তারা কথা বলতে পারছেন না, এই জন্যে কথা বললে আবার তারা বিপদে পড়বেন। এই যে ফিয়ার, ভয়, এই যে গভর্নমেন্ট সমস্ত বাংলাদেশটাকে, জাতিটাকেই একটা ভয়ের আস্তরের মধ্যে রেখে দিয়েছে। You must be facing that you may have noticed that 160 world leaders, they have given a statement on Dr. Yunus's charges against him, and to leave him, at least to the charges should be withdrawn by the government. And we have seen a statement from 50 editors of this country, of Bangladesh. It has come out and published in the newspapers. But I have been told by a journalist right now that all these 50 editors, they don't know about it. And even most of them, they don't even know about it. But they're now fearing that they cannot talk about it. They cannot say that it was not my signature. I did not give any statement because of fear. That's what I was going to say. This is a fear phobia. It's totally surrounding this nation, and we are being totally deprived of our rights. We cannot talk, we cannot write, we cannot even come on the street. If we come on the street, they beat us. And I told you that most of our leaders are facing charges against us, arsoning, then rioting, then throwing bombs and others cases. We are facing for the last 15 years. And very recently you have seen that a peaceful demonstration of our opposition political parties was totally thwarted by the law enforcing agencies. আমাদের প্রশ্নটা এই জায়গায়, আজকে অনেকে প্রশ্ন করতে পারেন যে এই মুহূর্তে আমরা রোহিঙ্গা ইস্যু নিয়ে কেন আসলাম। রোহিঙ্গা ইস্যু নিয়ে আসার একটাই মাত্র কারণ যে 6 বছর হয়ে গেল রোহিঙ্গা ইস্যু এখন আমাদের জন্য একটা বড় সমস্যা হয়ে দাঁড়িয়েছে। প্রতিদিন খবরের কাগজে দেখছেন যে আপনার ভেতরে আপনার এক্সট্রিমিজম দানা বাঁধছে, ভেতরে বন্দুক যুদ্ধ হচ্ছে, যেটা আমাদের জন্য শুধু নয় আন্তর্জাতিক কমিউনিটির জন্য একটা অত্যন্ত একটা অ্যালার্মের ব্যাপার। এটা একটা চিন্তার বিষয় যে রোহিঙ্গা থেকে আপনার সেখান থেকে আবার কোন ধরনের এক্সট্রিমিজম তৈরি হচ্ছে কিনা। এই বিষয়গুলো অত্যন্ত জরুরি আমাদের দেশের জন্য। And I would also like to call upon the international communities that they should give utmost priority to this issue. And I would like to conclude with our conclusion that what we want to say that this incumbent government regime, without people's mandate, focusing more on protecting its illegitimate power, itself marred with awful record of human rights violation, is not getting legitimacy to deal with the Rohingya human rights issues in the international forum. This is the most important issue. Our Prime Minister never visited any neighboring country which is concerned with the Rohingya issue to pursue them, that they will take the initiative to solve this crisis. She never did. And what, on the other hand, she has already done, she has signed a sort of agreement, bilateral agreement with Myanmar, that they will solve it bilaterally, which is almost impossible. Yes, and that Rohingya word is not used even there. So, আমি যে কথা বলতে চাই সেটা যে এই সরকারের যেহেতু জনগণের কোনো ম্যান্ডেট নেই, জনগণের সঙ্গে তার যেহেতু কোনো সম্পর্ক নেই এবং তার সে শক্তি নেই যে শক্তি নিয়ে সে আন্তর্জাতিক বিশ্বের সামনে গিয়ে দাঁড়াতে পারে এবং তাদেরকে আপনি কনভিন্স করতে পারে যে আমরা এই রোহিঙ্গা ইস্যু সলভ করতে চাই এবং মিয়ানমার তার যারা আছে এখানকার রোহিঙ্গা যে পপুলেশন তাকে তারা ফেরত নেবে এবং উইথ দেয়ার রাইটস, তাদের অধিকার, তাদের সম্মান, তার ঘরে ফেরার সমস্ত অধিকার নিয়ে তারা সম্মান নিয়ে তারা ফিরে যাবে। এই বিষয়টাকে আমরা নিশ্চিত করতে চাই এবং আমরা এটুকু বলতে চাই আমরা যে সমস্ত এখানে ইস্যুগুলো পয়েন্টসগুলো দিয়েছি আমরা জনগণের সমর্থন নিয়ে যদি আমরা কখনো জনগণের সরকার প্রতিষ্ঠা হয় তাহলে অবশ্যই সেই সমস্যাগুলোর সমাধান অতি দ্রুত হবে বলে আমরা বিশ্বাস করি। এখন আমরা যে জিনিসটা চাই অতি দ্রুত যে এই সরকার যারা জনগণের অধিকার হরণ করে নিয়েছে তাদেরকে সরিয়ে সত্যিকার অর্থেই একটা নিরপেক্ষ নির্দলীয় সরকারের অধীনে একটা নির্বাচনের মাধ্যমে বাংলাদেশের জনগণের অধিকারকে ফিরিয়ে দেওয়া। When the Rohingyas have lost their rights to go back to the country with their identities, with their honor and dignity, but here in Bangladesh itself, the people of this country are being deprived of the rights to vote, to go to the polling center and select their own representatives. So আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে আজকে আমাদের একমাত্র দায়িত্ব হচ্ছে সকলের, এই দেশের সকল মানুষের। এটা শুধু বিএনপির বিষয় নয়, অথবা গণতন্ত্র মঞ্চের নয়, অথবা অধিকার পরিষদের নয়, এটা আজকে সমগ্র বাংলাদেশের মানুষের আজকে সবচেয়ে বড় সমস্যা। এর চেয়ে বড় সংকট কখনো আসেনি যে আমি কথা বলতে পারবো না, আমি বিচার পাবো না, আমি আমার সিকিউরিটি, আমার ফ্যামিলির সিকিউরিটিকে রক্ষা করতে পারবো না, আমি স্বাস্থ্য সেবা পাবো না, আমি শিক্ষা পাবো না, এটা হতে পারে না। সেই জন্যই আজকে আমাদের আজকে সেমিনার থেকে যে আবেদন আমি জানাবো আপনাদের মাধ্যমে সকল আন্তর্জাতিক সংস্থাগুলোর কাছে, আন্তর্জাতিক কমিউনিটির কাছে, একই সঙ্গে জনগণের কাছে যে আসুন আজকে আমরা বাংলাদেশের মানুষকে তার গণতন্ত্রকে ফিরিয়ে দিতে, সেই গণতন্ত্রকে জন্য জনগণকে তার ভোটের অধিকার ফিরিয়ে তার পাশে দাঁড়াই। আজকে নিউ ইয়র্ক টাইমসে একটা লেখা বেরিয়েছে, পড়েছেন নিশ্চয়ই আমরা সব। নিউ ইয়র্ক টাইমসে খুব পরিষ্কার করে বেরিয়েছে যে ধীরে ধীরে গোপনে নীরবে বাংলাদেশের মানুষের গণতান্ত্রিক অধিকার কেড়ে নেওয়া হচ্ছে, মিলিয়ন্স অফ পিপল। এবং ওটাই সত্য, তাকে কাঠগড়ায় দাঁড়াতে হয় প্রতিদিন, তাকে ফেস করতে হয়। আজকে এই অবস্থা থেকে আমাদের বেরিয়ে আসতে হবে এবং এখান থেকে বেরিয়ে আসার কোনো বিকল্প নেই। আমি তাই আজকে আবারও আহ্বান জানাতে চাই যে আসুন আমরা সবাই ঐক্যবদ্ধ হয়ে এই ভয়াবহ যে একটা দানব আমাদের বুকের উপর চেপে বসে আছে তার থেকে আমরা নিজেদেরকে মুক্ত করি, বাংলাদেশের মানুষকে মুক্ত করি, মুক্ত একটা সমাজ গড়ে তুলি, আমরা বাংলাদেশের মুক্তি প্রতিষ্ঠা করি। ধন্যবাদ সকলকে। আসসালামু আলাইকুম। I thank you again for attending this seminar and hope to meet you again. Thank you. With this, I conclude this seminar. Thank you. দেখলাম তো ইফেক্টিভ বিশ্বাস করলাম মাওলা ভাই দেখে বলতে দিলে